Hello, this is Cryptolyze. I hope you are well this Friday, October 27, 2023. We meet today to talk about crypto, to talk about BTC, to talk about macro, because we really have this idea of decorrelation between BTC and macro. We will look together at why we have news regarding BTC despite the form of lateralization that we have had since the beginning of this week. It starts right away. As a reminder, you always have the possibility of having free access to the educational course, which is a 60-hour training course worth 400 euros, which allows you to learn blockchain, crypto, investment, technical analysis, trading, everything to become profitable. Through 130 videos, 400 pages of guides, quizzes to find out where you are in your progress, and all for free. To have access to this lifelong training, simply use the platform of one of our partners. Everything is explained in the comments and descriptions. We're going to start with some interesting news, which was given by Cointelegraph, which explains to us that, by Bitcoin, searches on Google increased by 826% in the UK. And there, when we read this news, we say to ourselves, well, that's good, we're back in a ball, everyone is talking about Bitcoin, 826% is huge, and so everyone is talking about Bitcoin and buying Bitcoin, it's related to ETFs, okay? I asked the question anyway, I found it weird. I'm going to quickly look at Google Trend, which is rather classic, in which I compared the term Bitcoin and the term buy Bitcoin in all countries over the last 5 years. Well, I want to tell you that buy Bitcoin is totally zero. When you compare the weak moments when it accelerated, it was really a bull run. Here we are really at zero. And yes, Bitcoin, we have a small increase. We went from 16 to, watch out, 20. It still remains relatively weak. We are in this approach, in this zone rather of 2019, which is rather classic in terms of volume. We are perhaps a little higher and a little lower than March 2020. But so yes, there is a little renewed interest in Bitcoin, but absolutely not in buy Bitcoin. And when we look at buy Bitcoin in England, so yes, there is a small increase. Well, it is from 5 to 10, so X2, but there is not the 826% either. In the UK, as noted, so we always pay close attention to the news, to check it because we are in the process of opening a form of narrative, and therefore obviously we must keep our feet on the ground. And for that, you have to check the information, cross-reference sources. Keep that in mind. So, little news about DIDX. DIDX, which is a decentralized exchange, certainly one of the best currently that we can find if we wish to do derivatives, which is in the process of changing, as we knew, from blockchain to be able to evolve. And in this case, they have chosen Cosmos to be able to build their own blockchain, and the 4 version of DIDX is officially launched on Cosmos, which is rather positive, and which will allow it to really have a complete super app ecosystem with really transaction costs that are going to be ridiculous. It was really an important moment for the evolution of DIDX going forward, and clearly they are preparing for the next bull run in terms of their infrastructure, that's obvious. We continue the news because they too are preparing. It is still the US regulations. Still on the use of cryptos to finance illegal activities, and we still have communications, speeches on this. So expect that by the end of the year we will have news on a law that comes out. We will see the extent of this law, but it is sure and certain, given the rate that it is currently making. I think that we will have no other choice than to suffer a law which will be, I think, not necessarily the best in the world. We are going to follow these elements closely because we also have JP Morgan, which is making a name for itself with the JP coin. So the JP Morgan coin, which is in fact the crypto which is used in their blockchain which is private, in inter-service payments, in inter-client payments, which allows funds to be transferred easily. And therefore we find ourselves on the JP coin, which has $1 billion of transactions daily, thing which is really important in terms of volume. So obviously it's hyper-centralized, it's accessible to no one apart from JP Morgan and their clients. But it's interesting to see the evolution because in June 2023 we were at 300 million, and there we find ourselves at more than 1 billion. It is in the process of scaling. Blockchain technology is essential in the world of traditional finance. There is no doubt about that. On the other hand, will the cryptos which are decentralized and in public be valued with this? This is the big question that needs to be asked at some point. On the other hand, we have JP Morgan, which simply explains that if the SEC rejects the Bitcoin spot ETFs, there will inevitably be a lawsuit. We know it. We know that there is significant pressure on the SEC. This is one of the reasons why we strongly know that it will be validated. We do not know exactly when, but in this case, there is a good chance that it will be validated. If it is ever refused, it is to be validated subsequently, so it is just a matter of months to be able to validate all of that. This is rather good news, even if we are still in the process of strengthening the arrival of the Bitcoin ETF, so pay attention to this type of news. We have been trying to reinforce a form of FOMO already for 10 days, 15 days, with the fake news that passes, etc., so be really careful to protect yourself. So, a little macro tour, we have a GDP TT3 which is above the forecast. I explained that it was certainly going to be the case, we were going to have a GDP which was above, and that it's interesting to see that the analysts who are in the process of positioning themselves are currently saying that it's not that bad at the US level. But I've been telling you that for almost 6 months, that it's not that bad. Bad than that at the US level. And that it's really very, very resilient. It's even almost 9 months. 1 year that I tell you that it's really very, very resilient. And when we look the results once again of yesterday's companies, there is a little more red. I agree, but that doesn't prevent us from finding ourselves on many, many greens with big guys who are in the green. Intel, Amazon, MasterCard, which is positive. So on this, we're going to ask ourselves the question, how is it that with all this good news, we find ourselves here with an S&P 500, which is in the process of stalling? The technical part, where we are in the process of retesting here the first part of resistance, which is 4,142, which corresponds to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 candles, in which it is normal that we have a liquidity gain, which is classic for me. My target always remains identical. A retest of the 4,100 objective, 1.618, which corresponds to the lower candles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Therefore, a level of liquidity, which is at the same time the level of rupture, the upward acceleration. I remind you that here we have a form of accumulation. We made the first attempt. Failure, second attempt, rupture, which is rather positive. We do here a retest. The retest is redeemed and we accelerate on the rise, which is positive, and therefore which is the important momentum to go and retest this rupture here, and which will be the crucial point to determine whether we are in a soft landing or in a hard landing. The rupture and closure below the 4,100 and the reintegration in this lower part will not be a good sign and will be a signal here to say that we are going to suffer severely. So on the other hand, what is interesting to see is that during all this upward acceleration, we only had bad news, clearly only bad news. We were always in a rate increase curve from the Fed. We had news which was not necessarily positive on inflation. We could not get the body of inflation out of the way. We had an increase in oil which was arriving. And there, what is happening? We have a deceleration while we have a series of good news. We have the US GDP which is picking up. We generally have the establishment of a standby in terms of rates. The European ECB has said that, like the Fed, in this case being with the market hardening, there is no point in continuing to increase its rates, and we remain at 4.5, and overall we will remain at 4.5, so we are sinking here. So on this, I would just like to remind you something. It is that the price markets upstream. In your opinion, is this upward acceleration not the pricing of the good news that we have today, and that this deceleration is the pricing of the bad news that we are going to have globally in the weeks, months to come? If we position ourselves here, it's May 2023. Okay, we start to have the good news at that time, so we can say that we had the good news from September, approximately this period where we started at the beginning of September. We started to have the good news. So we have a gap of 6 months, 5 months. We could say that here, July, 5 months apart, we arrive at Q1 2024, in which we have quite a few things that indicate us. I remind you that if we look at several other elements, I will just remove it and we will look at something that is important, which is the decoration of the rates. And on that, if I remove the logarithmic, which I put back in automatic, we see that we are generally getting closer to the zeros. This should normally happen Q1 2024. And we know that when we return to a form of correlation at 0%, we systematically have a recession which can be short or long. That matters little. But we have the beginning of a recession. Are we in the process here at the level of the SPF 500 of pricing this start of recession and this recession? So that means that we would still have about 2 months with a SP 500 which is sinking. So a retest perhaps of the 4,100. Are we going to look further down? Are we going to look much lower? Lower would still be relatively aggressive. We are going to return here. This implies that we could look for the target here from 618 to 3,800, in which we have a reintegration of the accumulation zone, yes. But above all, we would have a retest and a liquidity gain of these 2 wicks. which were absolutely reworked and which were important because they were the break rejections. And so there we have a lot of liquidity which is waiting. So for me, it remains an interesting area, 3,800. If we ever seriously break the 4,100, we are still far from that part. But we keep it in mind. And precisely when we arrive in these parts, we will have a set of bad news and a price which will potentially start to pick up again. So it could be at 4,100 or 3,800. It doesn't matter much. But we will in fact have this news shift, in which we will have negative news, and we will have a price which will go in the opposite direction, because it will quite simply be the moment where we will have to position ourselves. What is also interesting to see is that the DXY is not doing the break-off structure that we said yesterday. We have completely bought the candle, so we are in a form of lateralization. We will just wait. Whether or not we are going to close or even wait until the closing this evening to watch weekly, and that will certainly be in tomorrow's 1330 video. The important thing to see is that this week we had a return of volatility. Yes, but we have completely swallowed this return of volatility. There is no movement on. Since Monday overall, since we had this big acceleration, we are in a liquidity compression zone. We can see it clearly here, where since we had the big acceleration, we are doing range, quite simply. We are doing sideways in which we are building liquidity here, and the big liquidity at the moment, which is being built with blocks at 200, 300, 400 million, is below the 34,000. Is between the 33,000 and the 34,000, in which we still don't have the liquid to fetch. We have a little bit of superior liquidity to fetch the high level of 35,200. Clearly here, we are creating two polarity zones to seek out these polarity zones and carry out classic manipulation to be able to cause the next movement. Liquidity is excessively important. You need to understand why. When we look here in 1 year, we can see that we have had a very significant creation of liquidity in the 30,500 zone. Liquidity which speaks of 7 billion, 15 billion, in which we went to find the candle here. Okay, that's the spark of fake news. Of the ETF, in which we went to look for this liquidity exactly, and we stopped at this area. We liquidated this part in a single short story. This is to show you to what extent the importance of manipulation is strong, and that the liquidity is there to seek out whether it is fake news or good news. The important thing to see is that we have this bullish acceleration in which the first fake news gave us here this bullish acceleration to take the liquidity. Implied. We have a first indication of a form of manipulation. Fake news to collect 15 billions of cash. I want to tell you that yes, we are in a form of manipulation, and to prove that, it risks being very complicated. What is also interesting to see is that we have an increase in inflow in terms of Bitcoin options. So very important, options are what allows you to hedge the majority. So we will take options, for example, on a bearish breakout or a bullish breakout at the BTC level, and that allows you to be able to cover your position. So that implies here we arrive at levels which are higher than 2021, and when we look at this area, it is September, October, November, in which we are really on the peaks, are at the beginning of acceleration that we were able to experience in September. If we look a little bit at where we were, in September we were in this zone there, in this part of acceleration, October, okay? So September, October, and then we have November, and then December. And overall, when we look, the breakout really takes place on the 39 December, in terms of options here. When we see that this breakout here, it's really the 31 December, therefore, which is the zone in which we have the most options. So we really have a total cut in the number of options. And we see that it was a form of hedging in relation to the acceleration which occurred. So here we have an acceleration of the options compared to the acceleration 2. We are preparing for a potential reversal, where in any case institutional investors or large portfolios are hedging against a potential reversal, which is classic. Given that we are really in a salt reloading zone, which is rather normal, because if we look here in relation to the bearish acceleration that we had at the level of Terra Luna, that we do a Fibonacci retracement, we see that we are pitfall at the 618 of this level here. So it's normal that we have a tech profit here, that we have a salt reload, and that we potentially have a retracement. People are simply hedged, covering themselves in these areas, which is normal. At the short-term level, we can just see that we did have this range zone, that we had the breakout and the bullish acceleration of the range zone. I would like to remind you that this upward acceleration is mainly linked to a short squeeze and FOMO on the possibility of validation of an ETF. BTC, something which is not yet validated, and in which, here in the short term, following this acceleration, what do we have? What we usually see following this acceleration is a form of compression with a form of ranging in terms of liquidity. If we don't have cash, we can't leave. My question is, Would we not find ourselves in something similar to that? With a certain number of days, we will find ourselves in a form of ranging before having a new, which is positive with a bullish acceleration, negative news with a bearish acceleration, or even the arrival of the news, and therefore the implementation of the sell-off to go and retest here. We don't forget, buy the rumor, sell the news. Are we in this dynamic or not? Will the ETF allow for an instant influx of liquidity into it? This is the big question we need to ask ourselves, and we will answer it tomorrow morning at 13:30. At the level of Ethereum, we are still relatively weak. It's just that I wanted to make a little aside to show the difference between BTC, which really made a break here from its range, to the acceleration up there. That is to say that Ethereum is really lagging behind. We are really in the process of retesting a classic salt reloading zone. So there we filled the imbalance. We went looking for liquidity, which was found there to potentially make a bearish continuity. So that would reinforce a little this idea of having a ranging zone to do a retest of this zone here before being able to leave again. So there we would be a little in this dynamic there and saying, okay, I'm retesting here, I'm going to retest there to leave again. It would be logical at the same time. In terms of order flow on BTC, we don't have much that still changes the open task, which is relatively weak there. It's always something that intrigues me. That is to say that when we has a very low open interest like that, we have a lateralization, and which is rather normal, in which we will wait for a revival of the open interest before positioning ourselves by saying, okay, at that moment we have a positioning which is being done at the market level. This is not clearly the case. In terms of liquidity on Kingfisher, we see that yes, we have a little bit of short liquidity which is being put in place, a little bit of long liquidity, but overall we see above all that there is a huge dip in liquidity in this area, which is the imbalance that is there. All right? So it's pretty classic. Few people try to position themselves in this zone because we know that it is a simple classic retracement zone, because we have, as a reminder here, the top of the range that we broke out, we had a big upward acceleration, so we have imbalance at the market level. So that is to say that we have an area to fill, generally, in which we have an acceleration which is too strong at the market level, and therefore, at that moment, we tend to go and retest and fill this imbalance, and at the same time it corresponds here to the retest of the top of the range, which would be consistent for a form of pullback, before either making an attempt to reintegrate or an upward acceleration to start moving upward again. So once again, as I warned you at the beginning of the week, we have done absolutely nothing. Because quite simply, we are in consolidation. We are in a period of liquidity construction. And so there it is possible that next week we will find a set of news which will strongly influence the price. Prepare yourself for that, whether it is downward or upward. It does not matter much. But we risk having a real return of volatility. I think either at the beginning of the week or at the end of next week, in which we will have a movement in BTC compared to that. I do not think that we will remain in as long a lateralization as we have experienced there, because we are in October, we are in November. We need volatility to be able to work on the volumes, to be able to work on this last quarter of results. So we need yield, we need volume, we need volatility. I hope you like this video. If so, don't forget to leave me a like and a comment. It always makes me very happy and it supports the channel. And we meet at 13:30 to talk of ICP.